Hey there. RPG rules tutorial, number 2 in the series of looking at the RPG settings. So this is when you're coming in from the very top level at the beginning of your project and you're thinking, right, what do I want all the basic settings to be for this game? How do I want it to work? We looked at character stats before, now we're going to look at the hit settings and so on. So these are stored in the Assets RPG Rules Resources folder. You've got this setting called RPG object called RPGSettings. It has to have that name. You can have backups with different names, but the one with this name is the one that will get loaded and used. So the first thing we have is the to hit settings here that dictate how easy it is to hit an object. You know, whenever you try to use a hostile power, you have a chance to miss with it. If we go over to this gun robot here, and I try to punch him, and he tries to shoot me, we can see my last chance to hit was 75%. He had a chance to hit of 50%. Why is that? Get to safety and tell you why. So the base accuracy is 50%, chance to hit anyone or anything. You can change that if you want. If you want to have a game where you can never miss, do that, and it'll work. The player accuracy bonus is a bonus given to player characters. I have given the character the player is controlling at the time gets a 25% bonus, so that adds up to the 75% chance that I had. The inanimate bonus is a bonus to hit in inanimate objects, like this earth wall here. That would have given me an extra 50% for 125% chance to hit. However, it's capped between 5 and 95% here. That means you always have a 5% chance to miss a target, to hit a target, no matter how dodgy they are and how hard they are to hit. And you always have a 5% chance to miss, no matter how accurate you are. I've put them in there, those values, because it just adds a little bit of excitement to the game. No matter how good your stats are, you always have to have a 1 in 20 plan B in your head. You know, what if my attack misses? What if I do get hit by this powerful attack that I'm going in for? Yeah, so we can demonstrate changing these around a bit. Say if I change this to 100%, so sometimes you get a 100% chance to hit. You can see now I have a 100% chance to hit the earth wall. If I was to cap all chances to hit at 50% for reasons best known to myself, that's what we get there. So I'll leave that at 95. I'd say the main two patterns you'd have here would be 0 and 100 or 5 and 95. I'll go into these equations at the end of this video. If you're not mathematically inclined, just leave them at their base settings of linear and asymptotic. And we'll discuss the resistance cap with them. Now we have critical chance. By default in these settings, every attack has a chance to critically hit by 5%, and if it does, it'll do 50% extra damage. And when you get a critical hit, you'll see yellow damage numbers. So if I say make the base chance to critically hit 100%, we should see that every hit he does to me now does 7 damage, 50% extra. It'll be 7.5 in fact. We could make it that all critical hits do 200% extra damage, so they're all doing 15 now. I can drop that down to 60%, so only some of them will do the big damage to me. 5, 5, 15, there's a critical. So these seem like good figures to begin with. Give everyone a base chance of 5% to critical and a critical severity of 50%. So you do 50% extra damage on a critical. These numbers can be modified on a per power basis. I'll just have a quick look at some powers there. Power sets, telekinesis. TK throw, for example, or TK twist is damage dealing power. We can give it a critical bonus, you know, an extra 5% chance to critical. You might do that for some martial art powers or archery or something that's very sort of accurate. And it can have a severity bonus as well. And then each character also has a critical and severity bonus personal to them, which you can build up with equipment or buffs or whatever you like, really. Yeah, so that's how the sort of critical system works there. We also have base energy regeneration is 5 per second. So characters by default have an energy bar with 100 in it. He's got a little bit more because of his stats, I think. He's got an endurance of 20, giving him 10% maximum energy extra. And you know, when you use your powers, that energy bar goes down according to the power use, and you can see it's going up. If we get it down below 81, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, it goes up by about 5 per second there. Base health regeneration is 0 per second. That's mainly to stop enemies from recovering. If, for example, I put that to 10 per second, you can see this robot starts to recover health at an alarming rate. So that's why energy regeneration buffs work as a percentage by default, but health regeneration is just their absolute, because the base health regen set is 0 there. Yeah, so they're the regen settings, just the base for everyone's energy and health regeneration in points per second. These prefabs here, I would suggest you don't worry about too much. The base projectile prefab, if we have a look at that, has got a collider which is a trigger on it, the projectile script, a rigid body which you can turn on or off. It's turned off by default, it's kinematic, and a sphere collider which we can turn on and off for grenades and so on. So they're basically little objects I've made which are used you know, by the system. Whenever you create a projectile, it spawns one of these. Whenever you fire a beam attack, it spawns one of these, and so on. The reticle's that little targeting reticle there. Equipment is for equipment that gets dropped on the floor, and so on and so on. The throw icon is when you're picking up an object with your hand. That's the icon that appears. And throw AI power is for the AIs that use throwing, like this throwy robot over here. Come and get me. They use this for AI evaluation. So I'd say pretty much just leave these alone, unless you really know what you're doing and want to advance, you know, do some advanced coding or data setup there. So yeah, that's all those base settings there that we wanted to have a look at. I'll now do a little deep dive into some maths for those of you who want to stick around. So we have this accuracy equation here. We can make linear or asymptotic. Asymptotic means it never approaches a limit, and that limit is 100% chance to hit. So I'll just go to the documentation to talk about this one. Open up the documentation here and go to Tutorials, Basic Settings RPG. So if we have linear, we're just subtracting defense from accuracy. Asymptotic means we're using this equation from Diablo 2, where if I've got an accuracy of 200 and you have a defense of 200, that comes out to 200 divided by 200 plus 200, 50% chance to hit whenever they're equal. If I have an accuracy of 10,000 and you have a defense of 10,000, it's 50% still. So that's a great one if you plan to be giving characters items that boost their accuracy and defense to really high numbers. The linear equation, you're basically sticking around the idea that 50% is the defense cap. You know, when you get a 50% chance defense, you're practically unhittable by normal characters who don't have bonuses, and so on. So it's up to you which one of them you want to choose. If you don't want to think about these things, just leave it at linear. It's all balanced and set up for that. Have a look at resistance equations now. So I'm just going to go to Coriolis Broy's sister, Stargirl 3000, and demonstrate a couple of things with resistance now. So we'll drop her in the player spawn and go back to that RPG settings object. Okay, so we have resistance equations. Now, she's got a power that grants 100% plus 100% to corporal resistance when she turns this order on. And you can see that there. If we have a look at the stats window, we can see that's given her 50% damage resist. She'll take 50% less damage than normal to all these damage types. How is that? How's that working? The answer is we're using the buff formula for resistance there. So if we go to status buff, we describe that. Yep, so if a character has 100% resistance to crushing damage, they'll take half damage. If they get minus 50%, they only have 50%. A character with plus 200% resistance takes a third of the damage, plus 300% resistance takes a quarter of the damage, and so on. So it's an asymptotic scheme where you can stack resistance as high as you like, and it never reaches 100%. Like if I go to the store and buy some resistance candy, each of which gives me 25%, we can see that I'm now at 60%, 64, I'm now at 200% resistance, meaning I resist 67% of total damage. Yeah, so that one has the lovely quality that you can stack as many buffs as you want on top of each other and you're never going to be totally immune to damage. It has the bad side to it that it's hard for players to understand in some ways. You know, that you can basically eat as many of these as I want and, you know, can buff my resistance as high as I like, and I'm still sort of, you know, still taking damage, even though my stats would say I've got, you know, plus 350% to all resistances there. So if you like, you can switch to linear resistance, and that means you just add all the resistances together. So if we switch to linear, we just add all resistances and we have a cap. So when you get plus 100% resistance, that means it just caps at 75%. Turn it off and that buff goes away. If we activate the store and buy some resistance candy to buff ourselves, and bring up that dialogue, you can see now that gives us 25%, we're resisting 50% of all damage, 75%, and the last one has no effect. So these are easier for players to understand. You can set the resistance cap, like you could set it to 90 for example, and then, you know, having lots of buffs means you get capped at 90% resistance. With this model you can modify a character's individual resistance cap as well if you like. You know, like putting them in a tank role might give them 90% instead of 75. Cribbing that directly from City of Heroes there. Yep, so that's what those equations mean. Now, for the ultra mathematicians amongst you, if we have a look in the scripts folder, we have this RPG equations thing here. And there we've got the enums for accuracy equations and resistance equations. And we have a static function for returning a chance to hit, and a static function for getting a damage multiplier based on resistance. And I'm inviting you to put your own things in here and write your own equations if you like. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. If you've got some equations you've come up with yourself or know from another game and you'd like to have them in here, you know, there's the option to do that. But if that's not your bag and you're here to make the game more, you know, make a cool game rather than to play around with numbers too much, then just, you know, stick to these basic values here with asymptotic there, and you'll have, you know, quite a good game really. they're a good set of default settings to have there. Yeah, so that's something you may want to look at and customize when you're putting together your own game in RPG rules.